Racks are incredibly functional, but sometimes that's all they are. You can have a great looking drum rack, but usually this is something that you need to accomplish yourself with some additional work. Many of the stock setups range anywhere from a little bit clunky to just downright uninspiring. And as many electronic drummers will attest, the racks that come with eDrums are typically designed to hold your small pad setup in a very specific way. This leaves very little room for personalization. How large or flexible this rack setup is usually dictated by whichever price point you could afford. But this doesn't have to be the be all and end all of your rack situation. You can customize your rack with some simple components, a few handy tools and some ideas. So today I'm going to share these with you to help you get your rack setup exactly where you want it. I'll be going over some options for larger drum racks like my own, as well as some ideas for the smaller drum racks that usually come with electronic drum setups. So there should be something here for everybody. Before we begin, the last rack video that I made went through a bunch of different clamps and mounts to attach anything to your drum rack. If you missed the video, go check it out. It's pretty comprehensive, and there's a load of products on there that I didn't know existed when I first got into drums, so I'll leave a link to that video below. And the next rack related video in this mini series will be about how to ditch your rack and replace everything with stands if you want to. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Also, as with last time, any product links in the description might be affiliate links. These pay me a small commission if you choose to use these links to buy anything that I recommend. So I appreciate the support if you do find anything useful and choose to follow these links, but of course there's no obligation. And the same disclaimer as last time, this video applies to 1.5 inch round rack pipes. That kind of rack is what usually comes with electronic drum kits, and it's typically the most popular style of rack. And if you do have one of the cheaper electronic drum kits, you might just want to take a tape measure to the pipes just in case they're undersized. Okay, so on the last video I went into a bunch of different clamps and mounts that are useful for drum racks. I'm just going to recap the two of those that are most important for expansion and customization. So that's the standard right angle rack clamp and a T-leg or just T-clamp. Both of these clamps are used for connecting two rack pipes together. If you've got a standard electronic drum rack, chances are it came with these T-clamps as the main bar connections, and they're most likely to be made of plastic. This typically works out fine for the lightweight nature of most electronic drum kits. But if you do want to start adding more weight to your rack or making more complex rack structures, I'd personally recommend investing in some good quality metal ones, and probably also picking up some right angle clamps too. Quite a lot of different manufacturers make these clamps and they're very sturdy. I'll link to Gibraltar and Dixon branded ones below because they're the ones that I've used the most, but any brand that's made for a 1.5 inch rack pipe should work just fine. drum-tec also do some very well priced rack clamps. You can use these two clamps kind of interchangeably for certain tasks, but they're both a little bit better at different jobs. A T-clamp is typically used for joining the end of one rack pipe to the body of another. This could be for use as a leg, or it could be to mount a horizontal pipe off a vertical one. They're also great for having on either side of a rack bar to have a super sturdy horizontal pipe attached to two vertical pipes. They attach fully in line with themselves, so it keeps a very flat profile. Some brands also do some variations of the T-clamp, like Gibraltar's quick release ones if you need a speedier setup or teardown process. The only thing you possibly need to be careful with when it comes to T-clamps, less so with the metal ones but especially if you're using plastic ones, is trying to make sure that you don't mount too much weight off one of these clamps. It could end up putting quite a lot of pressure on the join, and plastic ones especially might start to bow or break. In this case you could use a supporting brace bar like this. These used to come on a fair few Roland racks, but I don't think they do them anymore as they don't usually use horizontal feet on their racks nowadays. Dixon do these flex rack mounting bars which come with a 24-inch pipe and a support brace. There's not a ton of situations that you would need this for, especially if you do upgrade to all metal clamps, but now and again I have used these to help support a freestanding bar, or for something like this module tree that I've recently made. In some situations right angle clamps will be a much more obvious choice. These are great for when you need to join two pipes together but also have access to the bar on either side. Sometimes I'll use these clamps instead of T-clamps for rack legs just because they open up much more quickly for fast setup and teardown. Due to the nature of these clamps, they don't end up quite as flat because of course they rely on the bars overlapping. So as I say, sometimes these are interchangeable, other times there's a clear pick for one or the other. And again, there's an array of different variations of this type of clamp, such as the adjustable angle rack clamps from Gibraltar. These could come in really handy for certain situations where you need a different angle on your rack. rack. So now you've got your clamps, you need some additional rack bars to mount off them. This is unfortunately where you might need to make some kind of aesthetic choice. Most standard rack bars from companies like Gibraltar, DW, Tama are going to be chrome, and this is perfect if your rack is chrome, but a lot of electronic kits don't come with chrome racks. Now in this situation you could just decide to do away with your existing rack and replace it with another pre-built option. Obviously I can't really cover all of them and it's not really the point of the video, but there are some simple options like a single centered curved bar rack, other options that more closely resemble standard electronic drum racks but are made of chrome. There's some pretty cool options here by Gibraltar and KitRig, though that KitRig one does appear to still come with plastic clamps. Or there's drum-tec's Diablo rack which comes with metal clamps. I'll leave some links for those below and we'll get back to the expansion stuff. So if you've got a black or any other colour drum rack that isn't chrome and you want to expand it with matching parts, there's two main options. I'd personally recommend having a look around on eBay, Reverb or any other kind of marketplace for people either selling full electronic drum racks without the kit or for spares or parts. In the past I've bought a cheap second-hand drum rack that was black to match the old TD3 rack that I used to use. They're not an exact match but they are black and they came with a few extra clamps, though of course they were plastic, and they were super cheap because they were off some no-name kit. You don't really get much choice over the size of the rack bars that come included, it's just going to be whatever was bundled with that kit, but it's a simple and potentially very cheap option to help you expand your rack with parts that match. If you do go for this option and you want to either expand or shorten those bars, I'll get to that later. There's also the option of purchasing some black rack bars from drum-tec. I've not seen many other brands or stores that are selling black rack bars, let me know down in the comments if you know of any, but it's great to see some options here. For most other brands, from what I can tell, you're typically looking at chrome rack bars. Gibraltar's straight standard rack bars appear to range from 20 inches to 68 inches, and it looks like DW do some rack bars that range all the way from 12 to 72 inches. There are also different size curved rack bars that you could go for if you like the curved rack look. I've got a few different curved bars myself, but I don't typically use them over the front of the kit, I much prefer them as side racks. I personally prefer the aesthetics of side racks in general as it keeps the front of your kit looking less cluttered, and curved bars are better for the side sections in my opinion because straight bars can end up coming in a bit too close. You can also use curved bars in other ways such as curving them inwards if you want it to really get close to your kit, or you can even use them vertically like on these different versions of my module racks to bring things inwards. And if you really need your kit to get more angular, there's also V-shaped rack bars. I've personally never used them, but I'm sure in certain situations they would come in really handy. Or if you wanted to create something even more unique looking such as the old Gibraltar spider rack, you can do. Though you could definitely use curved bars in a situation like that too. So once you start getting into expanding outwards, there's always a chance you might need some proper legs on your rack for additional support. You've got a few simple options here. The most basic option is just using either a T clamp or a right angle clamp with a vertical bar. You'll want to at least make sure that you've got an end cap on that bar so there's not bare metal touching the floor, and most bars that you buy will come with these on, but if you really want to protect the end of the rack bar and potentially add a bit more stability, you might want to opt for a rack bar foot. Gibraltar make the SC-RF foot, drum-tec sell the official Roland ones or their own brand of very cheap ones, and I'm sure plenty of other brands do too. You might even be able to pick up something cheap from a hardware store or something as long as it fits over a 1.5 inch bar. If you want to go with a pre-built option for a sidebar arm and leg, Gear for Music do a very cheap option in their KitRig brand. There's also options like the Gibraltar curved rack side extension or the Dixon wing rack extension, both of which are more expensive, but they come with either a curved or straight bar, right angle clamps, a multi-clamp, memory locks and a vertical bar, though these options have a full T-leg and rack feet on the bottom. Speaking of which, your second option is exactly that, using a T-clamp to make a leg with feet. If you have a T-clamp and a short bar, you can make one of these yourself by just adding the rubber feet on. Again, quite a few different brands will make these. I've used Gibraltar ones and I've used no-name ones in the past. Rubber rack feet are one of those items that I just tend to pick up if I see them going cheap, as I end up making use of them one way or another. The only problem when you're mixing and from matching brands is that sometimes the heights of the feet aren't exactly the same, so you'll probably want to go with a matching pair on the same T-leg. So that covers your basic extension options: horizontal and vertical, straight or curved bars attached together with clamps and with or without feet. If you do have some parts and they don't currently fit the bill, or you can't find exactly what you need and you need to get a bit more creative with it, I'm now going to cover a few additional tools, attachments or ideas to take what you have and turn it into what you need. First off is an option that I covered on the last video, but it's worth bringing it up again for customization. You can turn your rack bars themselves into cymbal or tom mounts with an attachment. My personal favourite options are the Gibraltar SC-RMAA and SC-RBA mounts. These can be attached to the end of either a vertical or horizontal bar to then let you mount a cymbal arm, a tom mount, or even a snare basket out of the end. I'll leave links to those ones below, but if you do want to see any of the other alternatives, check out my Mount Anything to Your Rack video after this one. Next up, if you need to extend your rack bars vertically, Gibraltar make the SC-GPREX black or SC-GCEX chrome extension clamps. So many letters. These aren't designed to be used horizontally, presumably due to weight issues, but they allow you to attach two vertical pipes together to create a much taller one. If you want to extend your bars horizontally, you can use those adjustable angle clamps that I mentioned earlier, but you'll most likely need the bar on each side to be supported by its own leg. So what if you've got some longer bars but you want to make them shorter to really tighten up your setup? That's where a pipe cutter will come in really handy. Again, I'm using, you guessed it, a Gibraltar pipe cutter. However, you could of course use any brand of pipe cutter that can cut through steel bars and take a 1.5 inch pipe. Because I knew nothing about cutting pipes down beforehand, and everything that I could find either wasn't big enough or would only cut through plastic pipes, I decided to get the Gibraltar one just to make things simpler. You could most likely get a much cheaper one from a hardware store if you know what you're looking for, but I will leave a link below in case you're like me and you don't fancy searching. This has come in really handy for me over the years for cutting down anything from rack bars to cymbal stands to music stands. In fact, there's something weirdly satisfying about cutting down pipes with it, and I often have to talk myself out of doing it with everything. The only other thing that you really need to take care with when you're cutting down rack pipes is watching your fingers on a freshly cut lip. It doesn't always come out perfectly smooth, and on the inside there will be a lip that bends inwards that's pretty sharp. It's always a good idea to file this down, and in fact you'll need to in order to fit an end cap back in it. This won't necessarily be a problem if you're just going to use it as a connecting bar under a clamp, but if it's an outward facing bar, you might want to cover it up. Once you filed it down, you can just put the original end cap back in it, but if you now don't have enough end caps because you've created two new bars, you can always buy more end caps from suppliers. Many different brands sell end caps, but I do usually try to match brands on this one if I can, because not every rack bar is made out of the same thickness of metal. So even if the diameter of the pipe on the outside is the same size, the diameter on the inside might not be. This isn't a problem that I run into that frequently, but now and again the end cap from one pipe just won't fit in another. Also, if you're struggling to get the end cap out of your rack bar, there's a really simple trick that you can do using the rubber feet from your rack. If you place the foot over the end of the rack bar and remove it while applying some pressure sideways, you can pop your end cap out of the rack bar. Handy. So now that we've covered most of the options available, what are some interesting ideas that you can do with your racks? Well, I'm going to run through as many options as I could think up with the parts that were available to me. I'll start off with some extensions and customizations of the Roland TD07KV rack. I feel like most electronic drummers will probably have a rack that's somewhat similar in size or style to this one. The biggest downside of these racks is their size. If you want to expand it, you might need to get some additional rack bars and measure up how big they would need to be. You could just replace the curved side rack bars with longer ones if you needed a bit more space, or you could put some extra short bars off the sides of the legs. If you are trying to mount things further away but you've got a cable snake, then there's always a chance that you're a bit more limited. Your extra pads might need to be hooked up to your auxiliary ports with additional cables, or you could get jack couplers and extra TRS cables to extend the lengths of your cables if necessary. Another downside to these racks is that awkward squared red bar in the centre. If you were feeling particularly brave, you could always try and cut this away, but I don't know what tools you would need and I wouldn't really recommend it. What I would recommend though, if you want more flexibility on the centre of your rack, is getting some extra rack bars that are the right length, a couple of T clamps and a short rack bar, and replacing the middle frame entirely. The feet do pop off these rack bars, so you could put them onto the end of the new bars, and then you can have any length of rack bar in the middle of the rack that you want. The other advantage of having a standard rack bar in the centre is that now you can mount either cymbals or other pads off that centre bar. Or if you wanted something particularly flexible, you could turn both sides of this rack into side racks by taking away the middle bar and adding proper rack feet. The two halves of the rack won't stay stood up on their own without proper T-legs and feet. Again, this will let you widen the rack further, but of course you do then lose out on the middle bar entirely. Those kind of side racks don't look quite as impressive on a smaller kit, but it's still something you could do if you wanted that flexibility. Another simple upgrade to a small rack like this is using those rack end mount attachments that I mentioned earlier, the Gibraltar SC-RMAA and the SC-RBA. This would allow you to attach cymbal or tom mounts directly into the rack pipes. Because I'll be sending this rack back to Roland, I couldn't demonstrate on these rack bars, but here's a mismatched version to demonstrate the idea. You could do this either on the center bars or on the end bars. Or even if you just wanted some extra vertical height on the end bars, you could just replace those with taller bars. One of the other types of rack that I'm a big fan of and that I use personally on my acoustic kit is the Gibraltar Stealth Rack. These separate rack parts are actually what got me onto the side racks as an idea. They're low profile racks that are designed to just sort of hide in your setup rather than encompassing your entire kit. With a few different bars and attachments, you could quite easily make something similar yourself if you wanted to out of existing rack parts. The only extra thing that you might need if you're using a double kick drum pedal is the bent stealth tube. Having a really low down rack bar could interfere with the crossbar on your pedals. This bar is designed to raise up over the pedal bar so that you don't need to worry about it. If you don't use a double kick pedal, then you don't specifically need this. The only real disadvantage of using a low profile rack solution is that you need your cymbal booms or other mounts to be tall enough to get them back to the required height. If you've only got short cymbal arms, this might not be an option that works for you. My electronic drum setup for gigs is more like this. One side rack on the left for all of my left hand pads and my module, sampler and sometimes my mixer. You can check out my previous video for all the mounting parts that I'm using. Then I'm often just using a simple tripod to mount my cymbal and floor tom on the right side. While my setup is based entirely in my house now due to having no gigs, I've sort of swapped this all around to a side rack on the right and a tiny little side rack on the left to make room for this ridiculous module mount that I test my kits on. It's made out of a curved bar up the middle, a straight bar with T-leg feet on each end, and one of those braces that I mentioned before for stability, with right angle clamps holding the horizontal bars in place. Using a freestanding module rack like this makes it really easy for me to spin it around and use it alongside my PC over MIDI so that I can test any kits that I'm developing without being at the drum kit. There are a million other directions that you could go with your rack once you've got knowledge of what parts are available to create what you've got in your head. So what did you think of these ideas and what's your preferred rack setup? Do you like the standard over the kit look? Do you prefer side racks or do you hate racks altogether? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful in any way, please pop a like on it and share it with a friend that you think might find it useful. If you want some new kits or samples for your electronic drum module, go check out my store at the eDrumworkshop.com, and most importantly, enjoy the rest of your day. Happy rack building, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!